The notification came through at 2:47 p.m. on my phone screen, glowing against the fluorescent lights of the conference room. District-wide wildfire preparedness drill initiated. All non-essential personnel evacuated. Conference canceled. I stared at the message while around me, other science teachers packed their notebooks and complained about wasted hotel rooms. Dr. Martinez was explaining something about insurance coverage, but I wasn't listening. I was calculating drive time back to Santa Fe, 12 hours early. That's how much my schedule had just shifted, like a chemical reaction accelerating under unexpected heat. I threw my materials into my messenger bag and headed for the parking lot, already tasting the desert air on my tongue. The drive home took me through landscapes that looked like they belonged on Mars. Red rocks jutting from scrubland, twisted juniper trees casting shadows that danced across my windshield. By the time I reached our neighborhood, the sun was settling low, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The air smelled like rain and creosote when I stepped out of my Honda, that distinctive scent that means home in New Mexico. Our adobe duplex sat quiet against the evening sky, its walls still holding the day's heat. Tessa's car was in the driveway, which meant she was back from work early too. I smiled, thinking maybe we could grab dinner at that little place on Canyon Road she loved. But as I approached the front door, details started registering in my mind the way they do when you've spent 15 years teaching teenagers to observe chemical reactions. Her shoes by the door, black heels with thin straps, the ones she called her special occasion shoes. Funny thing was, we hadn't had a special occasion in months. I picked up my keys from the bowl on the hall table and noticed it. The faint trace of cologne in the air. Not my cologne. Something with citrus notes, expensive and unfamiliar. In our bathroom, steam still clung to the mirror from a recent shower. 2 toothbrushes sat in the holder where there should have been one. The second one was damp blue and white stripes. Definitely not mine. I stood there for a moment, listening to the house settle around me, feeling that particular sensation you get when all your data points suddenly align into a pattern you don't want to see. Tessa was in the kitchen when I found her, standing at the island cutting vegetables for what looked like a salad for 2. She looked up when I entered, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe guilt, quickly covered by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Omar, you're back early," she said, setting down the knife. "How was the conference?" "Canceled. Wildfire drill." I watched her process this information, saw her fingers tighten slightly on the counter's edge. "Looks like you were expecting company. Just making dinner? You know how I am when I'm bored. I cook too much food." She laughed, but it sounded hollow in the kitchen's acoustics. "I'm glad you're home." I walked over and kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with that same cologne I'd noticed at the door. "Me too," I said, and meant it, even as my mind cataloged every micro-expression, every tell that 15 years of marriage had taught me to read. That night, lying beside her in our bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about chemical reactions, how sometimes you can have all the right elements in a beaker, stable and predictable, until one small change in temperature or pressure causes everything to transform into something completely different, something you didn't see coming until it was too late to stop. The morning brought new data points. Tessa's phone lit up on the nightstand while she was in the shower, and I saw the calendar alert that made my breath catch. Yoga, Studio 5 with C. I memorized those words, filed them away next to the cologne and the heels and the extra toothbrush. When she came out, towel wrapped around her hair, I was making coffee at our little espresso machine. She moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had a schedule to keep, grabbing a protein bar and her gym bag. "Yoga today?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah, trying that new studio downtown. My friend Callie recommended it." She was good at lying. I had to give her that. The name rolled off her tongue without hesitation, and she even added that little detail about the recommendation to make it more believable. I stepped away from the coffee machine and walked over to her, watching her face carefully. She was checking her reflection in the microwave door, applying lip gloss with the precision of someone preparing for a performance. "Good luck on your date," I said. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a failed experiment. Tessa's hand froze halfway to her lips, and she looked at me with the kind of startled confusion you see when someone's been caught off guard by a question they weren't prepared for. "What?" She laughed, but it came out sharp and nervous. "It's yoga, Omar. Don't be weird." "Right, yoga." I took a sip of my coffee, never breaking eye contact. "With C." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, measuring distances and exit strategies like someone who suddenly realized they were trapped in a room with a predator. You're being paranoid. Am I? I set my mug down on the counter and leaned against it, crossing my arms. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been planning something special. The heels last night, the extra preparation this morning, the way you keep checking your phone. I don't know what you're talking about. But her voice had gone up half an octave, and she was fidgeting with the strap of her gym bag. Tessa, I said her name quietly, the way I did when I was trying to get a student's attention during a lab demonstration. I'm a chemistry teacher. I notice details. I see patterns. And right now, all the evidence is pointing to something I really hope I'm wrong about. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, calculating her next move. Finally, she grabbed her keys from the counter and headed for the door. I'll see you tonight, she said without looking back. We can talk then if you want. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our morning routine, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak, that would come later. This was something else, something analytical and patient. I had work to do. My neighbor Marta ran a food truck called Sabor de Casa that she parked in different spots around the city, following the lunch crowds and the tourist patterns. She'd lived in Santa Fe her whole life, knew every street and every story, and had the kind of intuitive understanding of people that comes from serving them food and listening to their problems for 20 years. I found her truck parked outside the courthouse, serving green chile breakfast burritos to lawyers and clerks who needed fuel for their morning battles. She looked up when I approached, her weathered face creasing into a smile. Omar, shouldn't you be teaching kids how to blow things up? Teacher workday. Students are off. I ordered a horchata and leaned against the side of her truck. Marta, you know everything about this city. Tell me about Studio 5. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Studio 5? That new place downtown? She handed me the drink, ice cold and sweet with cinnamon. It's not really a yoga studio, mijo. It's a Pilates place with a little bar attached to the back. Kind of hidden, you know? No cameras, 3 different exits. The kind of place people go when they don't want to be seen. The horchata turned bitter in my mouth. A bar? More like a speakeasy. Expensive drinks, dim lighting, very private. Popular with people who are, how do I put this, exploring their options. She studied my face carefully. Everything okay at home? I'm not sure yet. I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of our shared grocery app. This morning, someone bought figs, manchego cheese, and sparkling rosé. Expensive stuff. Marta whistled low. That's not a grocery run. That's a seduction kit. Who's got expensive taste in your house? Not me, and definitely not Tessa. She hates figs, but I knew someone who loved them. Someone who'd made a point of ordering them every time we went out to dinner. Someone who'd once given a whole lecture about the difference between Spanish and Italian manchego. Thanks, Marta. Omar. She reached out and touched my arm. Be careful, okay? Sometimes, when we go looking for the truth, we find more than we bargained for. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the plaza, past the cathedral and the palace of the governors, thinking about patterns and evidence, and the way small details could add up to devastating conclusions. My phone buzzed with notifications, text messages and app alerts that I'd been ignoring all morning. But when I got home and opened our shared device settings, I found something that made my hands shake. Tessa's smartwatch had been syncing data all week. Heart rate spikes at the same times as her calendar showed meetings. Geofence notifications from 3 locations, Studio 5, La Caverna Hotel, and the trailhead above Bishop's Lodge. All the places where her pulse had spiked above 120 beats per minute for extended periods. I wasn't a hacker. I wasn't even particularly tech-savvy. But I was a patient man, with shared devices and a talent for reading data, like it was a chemical formula. The graph on my screen looked like a seismograph, recording an earthquake. All those peaks and valleys telling a story I didn't want to believe, but couldn't ignore. My phone chimed with a voice message notification, and when I opened it, I saw it had been sent to our family group chat by mistake. Caleb's voice, low and intimate. Same room, 8 o'clock. Bring the red dress. I sat in my home office, staring at that message, feeling the last piece of the puzzle click into place. Caleb Martinez, vice principal at Lincoln High School, where I taught chemistry and where Tessa volunteered for fundraising events. Caleb, who'd been coming to our dinner parties for 3 years, who knew Tessa's schedule better than I did, who'd always been just a little too interested in her opinions, a little too quick to compliment her ideas. The red dress was hanging in our closet, hidden behind winter coats like a secret. I'd never seen her wear it, had wondered why she'd bought something so expensive and then never found the right occasion. Now I knew the occasion had never been for me. I deleted the voice message from the group chat and took a screenshot first, evidence for the file I was building in my mind. Then I sat back in my chair and thought about chemical reactions again, about catalysts and activation energy and the way some processes could be controlled if you understood the science behind them. In my lab at school, 13 Bunsen burners created a symphony of hissing blue flames while my students worked on their flame tests, adding different metal salts to see how they change the color of the fire. Copper burns green, sodium burns yellow, potassium burns purple. Predictable reactions, beautiful in their consistency. I moved between the lab benches, checking their technique, making sure they were following safety protocols. But my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about catalysts, substances that speed up chemical reactions without being consumed in the process. Add a small amount to a stable mixture, and everything changes. The reaction that might have taken hours happens in seconds. "Mr. Martinez," called Jessica from the back row. "What happens if you add too much catalyst?" Good question. Too much catalyst can cause a runaway reaction. The process accelerates beyond your control, and you can't stop it once it starts. I looked around the room at their eager faces. That's why we measure carefully. That's why we plan. Because once you start a reaction, you have to see it through to completion. After school, I stayed late to clean the lab and organize my thoughts. The building was quiet, except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of basketball practice in the gym. I sat at my desk, grading papers and thinking about control variables and experimental design. The plan was forming in my mind like a crystal growing in a supersaturated solution, slowly at first, then all at once. I wouldn't confront them with tears or accusations. I wouldn't make a scene or lose my temper. I would teach them something instead, a lesson about consequences, about the chemistry of trust and how it breaks down when you introduce foreign elements. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez, the neighborhood association president. "Omar, we need someone to help with monsoon night next weekend. Can you handle the projector for the community gratitude reel?" Everyone's sending videos and photos. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'd be happy to help. Send me everything you've got." The universe, it seemed, had just handed me the perfect catalyst. Over the next few days, neighbors sent me dozens of video files and photos for the gratitude reel, birthday parties, graduation celebrations, family vacations, pet photos, sweet, innocent moments that captured the spirit of our little community. I spent hours editing them together, creating a narrative flow that would make people smile and remember why they loved living here. But while I worked, I also paid attention to backgrounds and details, the way I'd trained myself to notice everything in a chemistry lab. In a TikTok video submitted by Mrs. Chen from down the street, I caught a glimpse of a hotel hallway that looked familiar. La Caverna, the same place where Tessa's heart rate had spiked on multiple occasions. In the background of the frame, just for a few seconds, someone walked past wearing a flash of red fabric, the same shade as the dress hidden in our closet. I saved that clip separately and continued editing, feeling that cold, analytical calm settling over me like a lab coat. The reel was taking shape, becoming something more than just a celebration of community moments. It was becoming a teaching tool. That weekend, I decided to test something. I set off our home security alarm accidentally while Tessa was in the shower, then watched as she hurried out in her bathrobe to punch in the code. 1123. 4 digits that meant nothing to me, but everything to someone else. Extension 1123 at Lincoln High School belonged to the vice principal's office. "System malfunction," I told her, resetting the alarm. "I'll call the company tomorrow." She nodded and went back to getting ready, but I saw her in the reflection of our sliding glass door, standing at the bathroom mirror, practicing twisting her wedding ring on and off her finger like a magician learning a new trick. She was rehearsing, preparing for something I wasn't supposed to know about. Later that night, I sat on our back patio cleaning furniture that didn't need cleaning, listening to the distant sound of thunder rolling across the mountains. The monsoon season was starting, bringing with it the promise of rain and the kind of dramatic weather that could change plans in an instant. My phone lit up with a weather alert. Severe thunderstorm warning for downtown Santa Fe. Flash flood potential. Street closures likely. I opened my weather app and studied the radar, watching the storm cell build and move across the map like a living thing. By Thursday night, when Tessa had another yoga session scheduled, that storm would be directly over the hotel district. I texted Marta, "Any chance you'll be downtown Thursday evening?" Her response came back immediately. "I can be wherever you need me to be, mijo. What's the plan?" Thursday arrived with the kind of heavy, electric air that makes you feel like the sky might split open at any moment. Dark clouds built up over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains like a wall, and the wind carried the scent of rain and ozone. Tessa left the house at 7, dressed in jeans and a workout top, gym bag slung over her shoulder. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then grabbed my keys and headed downtown. Marta had positioned her food truck under the awning of a hotel 2 blocks from La Caverna, close enough to have a clear view of the entrance, but far enough away to avoid suspicion. The storm hit at exactly the moment I'd predicted, sending sheets of rain across the plaza and forcing everyone to take shelter under whatever cover they could find. Through the plastic sheeting that protected Marta's serving window, I watched couples and business travelers hurry through the downpour, seeking refuge in hotel lobbies and restaurant doorways. And then I saw them, Tessa and Caleb, running hand in hand through the rain toward La Caverna's entrance, laughing like teenagers. They ducked under the hotel's awning, and in the brief moment before they disappeared inside, I heard Caleb's voice carried on the wind. "You're a storm I'd chase anywhere." Tessa's laughter mixed with the thunder, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet. This was something colder, more focused. I pulled out my phone and made a note. 8:23 p.m. Subject observation confirmed. Proceeding to final phase. Monsoon night arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, warm air, and the kind of magical golden light that makes Santa Fe look like a painting. Our neighborhood association had transformed the community courtyard into a festival space, with paper lanterns strung between the cottonwood trees and the scent of grilled corn and green chili filling the air. I arrived early to set up the projection equipment, testing the speakers and adjusting the screen angle, while neighbors drifted in with folding chairs and coolers full of beer. Kids ran around with paletas, their faces sticky with mango and lime, while adults gathered in clusters to catch up on gossip and complain about property taxes. Elena Rodriguez found me adjusting the focus on the projector. "Omar, this looks great. Thank you so much for putting this together. How long is the reel?" "About 20 minutes, I said, checking the sound levels one more time. 5 chapters, each highlighting different aspects of our community. I think people are going to really connect with it." Tessa arrived just as the sun was setting, wearing a white sundress that made her look like an angel in the golden light. She kissed my cheek and settled into a chair beside me, her hand finding mine in the kind of automatic gesture that comes from years of marriage. "This is lovely," she said, squeezing my fingers. "You did such a beautiful job with the setup." I squeezed back, feeling the weight of her wedding ring against my palm. I wanted it to be special, a night people would remember. As the crowd settled in and Elena took the microphone to welcome everyone, I felt that familiar calm descend over me. The same feeling I got when I was about to demonstrate a particularly dramatic chemical reaction for my students. Everything was prepared, all the variables controlled. Now all I had to do was add the catalyst and watch what happened. "Before we begin," Elena announced, "Omar Martinez has put together a wonderful tribute to our community. Let's all give him a round of applause." The crowd clapped politely, and I stood up to wave, catching sight of Caleb sitting near the back with his wife Miranda. He raised his beer bottle in a small salute, completely unaware of what was coming. The reel began innocently enough. Birthdays and anniversaries, kids learning to ride bikes, neighbors helping neighbors with yard work. The crowd murmured appreciatively as familiar faces appeared on screen, everyone enjoying this nostalgic journey through the past year's highlights. Chapter 2 featured local businesses and community events, including footage of Marta's food truck and several shots from the farmers market. People were relaxed now, settled in for what they thought would be a pleasant evening of community bonding. Chapter 3 celebrated new beginnings, job promotions, new babies, couples who'd gotten engaged. The music swelled appropriately, and I saw several people wiping away happy tears. Chapter 4 highlighted friendship and support. showing neighbors helping each other through difficult times, community members volunteering for various causes, and the kind of connections that make a neighborhood feel like family. Then came Chapter 5, Places We Love. The music shifted to something more contemplative as the screen filled with images of local landmarks, the plaza at sunset, hiking trails in the mountains, favorite restaurants and gathering spots. The crowd settled back in their chairs, expecting more of the same gentle nostalgia. The La Caverna Hotel hallway appeared on screen in slow motion, just a beautiful architectural shot of Southwest design and warm lighting. For a few seconds, it was simply artistic, until a door opened in the background and a figure in red fabric crossed the frame like a ghost. No faces were visible, just the suggestion of movement, the hint of a story. The caption appeared over the image. Sometimes we say thank you to the wrong people. The crowd's murmur shifted slightly, confusion beginning to ripple through the gathering. I felt Tessa's hand tighten on mine, her nails pressing into my palm like tiny warnings. The next image showed downtown Santa Fe during the thunderstorm. Rain-slicked streets and couples running for shelter, romantic and atmospheric, until the camera caught two figures hurrying toward a hotel entrance, their body language unmistakably intimate. Still no clear faces, but the red dress was unmistakable. The timestamp in the corner read, Thursday, 8:23 p.m. Tessa's breath caught, and I felt her entire body go rigid beside me. But the reel wasn't finished. The final sequence showed data visualizations, heart rate graphs, location tracking maps, calendar screenshots with identifying information blurred out. To most of the audience, it probably looked like abstract art. But to anyone who understood what they were looking at, the story was crystal clear. As the music faded and the screen went black, I stood up and took the microphone from Elena, who looked confused but didn't protest. "Thank you all for watching," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "Before we continue with the evening's festivities, I want to share something with you about the importance of community trust." The crowd was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was happening, but not sure what. I could see people turning to look at each other, phones being pulled out discreetly. As a science teacher, I believe in the power of evidence and observation. When we notice patterns that don't make sense, it's our responsibility to investigate, not to hurt people, but to understand the truth. I gestured toward the blank screen. What you just saw was a case study in deception, how two people can lie to their community, their families, and themselves while thinking they're clever enough not to get caught. Tessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete. "Omar, stop, please." But I continued, my voice steady and calm. "The evidence speaks for itself. Synchronized device data, location tracking, hotel receipts charged to joint bank accounts, because someone forgot to switch their payment settings back." The crowd was riveted now, everyone leaning forward in their chairs. I could see Caleb near the back, his face pale in the lantern light. Miranda looking between her husband and the screen with growing understanding. "I'm not sharing this to humiliate anyone," I said. "I'm sharing it as a warning. Secrets are like structural damage. They weaken the foundation of everything they touch. And during storms, weakened structures collapse." Caleb stood up, his voice cutting through the night air. "This is pathetic, Martinez. You made a whole presentation to embarrass your wife because you can't satisfy her yourself." The crowd gasped, and I felt something shift in the air around us, like the moment before lightning strikes. Heat is a catalyst. I'd learned that in my very first chemistry class. Add heat to a stable compound, and everything changes. "Is that what you think this is about?" I asked, reaching for my laptop to advance to the next slide. "Jealousy?" The screen lit up again, this time showing a document with official letterhead. Lincoln High School's Employee Conduct Policy. Caleb's signature was clearly visible at the bottom, right above the highlighted clauses about role model obligations and fraternization with community members. "I think this is about professional ethics," I said. "About a vice principal who signed a conduct agreement and then violated it. About someone who used his position of authority to pursue married women at school fundraising events." The silence was deafening. I could hear insects buzzing in the cottonwood trees, the distant sound of traffic on Paseo de Peralta, the rapid breathing of 300 people who'd just witnessed their quiet neighborhood drama explode into something much bigger. Caleb stepped forward, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "You son of a bitch. You planned this whole thing just to destroy me." "No," I said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. He lunged toward the stage, but Coach Henderson from the local gym stepped in his way, along with 2 other men I recognized from the school district. Word would spread fast in a community this small. By Monday morning, everyone would know exactly what kind of man Caleb Martinez really was. Tessa was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked around at the crowd of neighbors and friends who'd watched her life implode in real time. "Please," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the murmur of 300 people processing what they'd just witnessed. "The district will have to be notified," I said, still speaking into the microphone. "There will be an investigation. Mr. Martinez will probably need to find a new job, preferably in a different town." Miranda stood up near the back, her voice shaking but clear. "Caleb, get your things. You're not coming home tonight." The crowd began to stir, people gathering their belongings and their children, conversations starting in hushed tones that would continue long into the night. Elena took the microphone back from me, thanking everyone for coming and suggesting that perhaps it was time to call it an evening. As people dispersed, I found myself standing alone by the projection equipment, watching my neighbors file out of the courtyard with their families and their new understanding of what had been happening right under their noses. Tessa approached slowly, her sundress wrinkled and her mascara smeared. "How long have you known?" "Since the day I came home early from the conference. I started unplugging cables and packing up the projector. The cologne in our bathroom, the extra toothbrush, your shoes by the door. Why didn't you just ask me? Why didn't you give me a chance to explain?" I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 8 years, and felt nothing but a quiet sadness. "Would you have told me the truth?" She had no answer for that. "The divorce papers will be ready Monday," I said. "You can have half of everything, just like the law requires. But I'm keeping the house." "Omar, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No, we can't." I finished packing the equipment and headed toward my car. "Some reactions can't be reversed, Tessa. Once the catalyst is added, once the process starts, you have to let it run to completion." Behind me, I could hear her crying, could hear Caleb arguing with Miranda by their car, could hear the neighborhood processing the scandal that would be talked about for years. But I felt oddly peaceful, like the calm that follows a thunderstorm. The drive home took me past familiar landmarks: the plaza where we'd had our first date, the restaurant where I'd proposed, the church where we'd gotten married. All of it felt like ancient history now, artifacts from someone else's life. My phone was buzzing with messages by the time I reached the house. Colleagues from school, neighbors who'd been at the event, probably reporters who'd already caught wind of a school administrator's public downfall. I turned it off and sat on my front porch, looking out at the quiet street and the mountains beyond. Marta appeared around 10 o'clock, carrying a container of pozole and a bottle of good tequila. She sat down in the chair beside me without saying anything, and we watched the stars come out over Santa Fe. "You okay, mijo?" she finally asked. "I think so. It's strange. I thought I'd feel worse, but mostly I just feel free." "Revenge isn't always about feeling better," she said. "Sometimes it's about setting things right, making sure the truth gets told." We sat in comfortable silence, sharing the pozole and watching the occasional car pass by. The night was warm and still, the kind of perfect desert evening that reminds you why people fall in love with this place. By Monday morning, Caleb's resignation letter was in the principal's inbox, and the school district had posted his position as vacant. Tessa had moved her belongings to a casita on the south side of town, leaving behind only the items that belonged to both of us, and a note apologizing for everything. I spent the weekend dividing our possessions like lab equipment, measuring cups and beakers to me, wine glasses and serving dishes to her. Fair and precise, the way I approached everything else in my life. On Tuesday evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers to grade, enjoying the solitude and the sound of the wind through the cottonwood trees. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could see lights in windows and families gathering for dinner, and I felt grateful to be part of this community, even after everything that had happened. My phone rang. Dr. Patricia, the principal at Lincoln High. "Omar, I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know this must be difficult." "I'm okay, Patricia. Really. I appreciate you asking. The district is conducting a full investigation, but I want you to know that your job is secure. What you did took courage, and it was the right thing to do." After she hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked out at the mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warm weather. The sky was clear and endless, full of stars and possibilities. I thought about chemical reactions again, about how sometimes you have to break down existing compounds to create something new. The process isn't always pretty, and it often involves heat and pressure, and the kind of dramatic transformations that look like destruction from the outside. But at the end of it all, when the reaction is complete and the products have stabilized, you're left with something different. Something that couldn't have existed without the catalyst, without the willingness to let go of what was and embrace what could be. I opened my laptop and began typing the final entry in my lab notebook. Experiment concluded. Hypothesis confirmed. Sometimes the most important lesson isn't how to prevent a reaction, but how to survive it with integrity intact. Results suggest that honesty, while initially destabilizing, ultimately produces more stable and sustainable compounds than deception. The desert night settled around me like a comfortable blanket, full of the promise of rain and new beginnings. Tomorrow, I would teach my students about activation energy and the beautiful, terrible power of change. Tonight, I would simply sit here in the quiet and remember what it felt like to be proud of the man looking back at me from my reflection in the dark window.